Well, good morning again.
Good morning.
It's good to see you here this morning. We had a good number in the 9 o'clock session. I wasn't sure what we'd have this morning. Usually the time changes are not that difficult on me, but for whatever reason, man, I felt it this morning. Just trying to, as I'm reviewing my classes and stuff like that, and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't think this is actually like settling in my head. I'm getting a little panicky here. I'm looking at my notes and I'm like, I can't remember what I'm supposed to say. And it happens a little more these days, but I really felt it this morning. So anyway, we're going to be looking at 2 Kings chapter 5. And I think pretty much we might just spend our whole time in this one chapter. I think we're going to read the whole chapter. And just to remember kind of where we're at and how we got here, we spent time mostly in chapter 4 on Wednesday night looking at some of these incredible miracles of Elisha. And what was there, 4 or 5 miracles there in chapter 4? Some of them a little more detailed, some of them just very quick, that we went through. But part of what we're seeing with that is how God worked through his prophet Elisha. To teach some very important principles. Maybe we could teach some things about faith and the power of God. And we talked about just a number of those points as we look through that. In Elisha increasing the widow's oil, where she didn't have any money, but just keep pouring that pot, and you can sell that oil. Remember, that was pretty incredible. And then the Shunammite woman, her son dying. And the power of God demonstrated in bringing him back to life. And then the purifying of the stew. In some ways, not as powerful or maybe as grand as raising the boy from the dead, but just teaches some very simple points. Each of those miracles were for the point and purpose of demonstrating God's power. And we spend a lot of time on that because sometimes we just need to be reminded of God's power. And we look at chapter 5, we're going to see that again in chapter 6. And so our schedule has us here. We slow down just a little bit and spend some time, considering these things. And I think it's important, and I'm glad we're going to do that. Someone has asked, our schedule has been a little bit off. Like, where are we at exactly right now? Because, we had the 2 snow days. We really got behind. And so it's been a little bit difficult to figure out how we're going to make that up. But now it's all kind of sorting out. We have made up some time. And we have a review day coming up. Is it this Wednesday, I think? We're not reviewing. We're just continuing on, with the schedule. And then at the end of next month, there is a review day again. We're not reviewing. We're just catching up the schedule. So when it gets to the end of the schedule, if you still have that, we're going to be right where we need to be. It's going to work out. So when you're looking at the schedule now, we're just a little bit behind date-wise. But it's all going to work out just fine. 2 Kings chapter 5. We talk about this man named Naaman. And we've talked about him before in times. I preached a lesson on Naaman here a year or 2 ago. That's just a very powerful kind of picture in this lesson here of God's power. But I do want us to spend some time on this, and I want us to be thinking too. I've got to where I mention this more often. For a reminder for the class, those of you who are teaching the youth classes next quarter, you already know this. You're already trying to prep for next quarter. But sometimes I think it's good for us if we just kind of, when we stop, and more have been doing this now, and I really appreciate it. This would be a real good point, in the children's classes. I'm glad we're identifying that. We need to be doing that because of those who are prepping to teach the children's classes next quarter. But also, it's interesting to me that very often if someone says something, this will be an important point for the children's class, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, and for this class too. It's usually a point that we just need to be thinking about too. And so I want to encourage us to continue to do that. And when we talk about this story about Naaman, I'm thinking we might find several points that stand out, and points that we might think about here. And for you teachers who are writing your notes, there'll be several things for you to put down in your notes, I think. 2 Kings chapter 5. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Syria. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Give me a point or two from that. Let's set the story. Let's set the stage. Give me a couple points.
Being a leper meant you were typically ostracized from society.
Being a leper was a bad thing. So there's been, the whole verse is talking about how great Naaman is. You know, that he has reached a point of being recognized by many, but maybe most importantly by the king, as being a great commander. And so he's held up in that way. He was a great man in the sight of his master, the king, highly regarded. There's another point I hope stands out. What else do you see right here?
I don't think people want to be around him because he's contagious.
People aren't going to want to be around him when this news gets out about leprosy. Joe?
It says, because of him, the Lord gave Aaron victory.
Oh, okay. All right. So, because through him the Lord had given victory to, depending on which version you have, Aram or Syria. All right. So the Lord is working through him. Now, these are not typically considered to be the people of God we're talking about here. But for whatever purpose or reason, the Lord is working through him. And so when we think about the great things that he has managed to do, it's understanding where the power has come from to be able to do that. But this leprosy thing, let's think about this for a moment. All right, it's debilitating. It's a skin disease, but it seems like it goes deeper than that. It was a death sentence in those days. If you had leprosy, it was understood you were going to die 4 to 7 years, and you were going to die. And the last part of that was not nice. None of it was nice. Especially on the end where your skin is just deteriorating away. There was no cure at that time. And so imagine how this sounds to, well, first to Naaman, oh no, this is bad news. But to the king, he is dependent on Naaman. Naaman was his go-to guy. And so when he heard this news, he is disturbed about that. Verse 2. Now bands from Syria had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 sets of clothing. All right. Does the king want something to happen good for Naaman? Yes, I'm thinking so. This is big. But let's back up for a moment. Let's talk about this young servant girl. Where'd she come from? Israel. What is she doing in Syria? Huh? She was captured. She was not there on vacation. She was not there because she thought Syria looks like a good place to live. That was not how that worked. She was taken there. All right? So, does it seem surprising to you in any way that when she hears about Naaman having leprosy, are Are you surprised at her response? Talk to me about that. What might we expect her response to be?
She has been forcibly taken from her family into a different country and pressed into service, although working in her family, it may be very similar duties, but still, it's not by her choosing.
It's not by her choice.
She still has a goodwill toward her master.
So she's not at home. She's not with her family. She was taken there. She's captive. And so she has been made a servant girl. I'm not seeing a whole lot of reasons why she would say, life is pretty grand right now. Are you? I mean, I'm kind of taking this and seeing this the other way. That she has a lot of reasons to be upset, to be angry, to be bitter, and maybe even thinking of her master, leprosy. Well, that's what he deserves. I could imagine that. But it's not. That's not her attitude, Joe.
I was thinking, I don't remember which king is king at this point. The conditions in Israel, it could be that it wasn't a very favorable place to live in. And I know at that time, being captured and that kind of war happening was much more of a common occurrence. So it may have been something that was a reasonable expectation to have in your lifetime. So anyway, it's just interesting to see that she seems to adapted to this new life and have some sort of care.
So she's adapted in some ways to this life, kind of taking it as, okay, this is what life is right now. And as the text indicated, it's like there have been these incursions into Israel. There's been several of those. Okay.
I was thinking the same thing. As you said, it's very common for there to be raids and people taken as slaves and,
Right.
and whatever. What was not common was to become the servant of the king's wife.
Okay. All right.
So she had it pretty good, quite frankly.
So
You
she
may have the paddock there that she had at home.
she must have had some skill sets that kind of are an attitude that has put her in a position here of serving Naaman's wife. Okay. So that's a little bit of something, Ron.
She hadn't left her faith at home.
She had not left her faith at home, right? As you said. Yeah, she had not left her faith at home. Okay, so in Syria, we're not talking about the children of Israel. Okay, this is a country that has battled against Israel. And so even though Israel was not what it needed to be, as we have seen the evil kings that have led the nation, and let's understand at this point, Israel is deteriorating as a nation. It's not good, okay? But it's still home. That's still your people. We talked recently about Edom and Judah and how Edom was condemned because of their incursions and not helping Judah when enemies came in. We're talking about a different country. But even at that, the point we recognize is that the people of Edom were still kin to those people in Judah, and God was upset that they weren't acting that way. You wouldn't say that about Samaria. This is just an enemy of the people of God. And so I'm thinking in my mind, it would have been pretty easy for this servant girl to say, you got leprosy. You got what you deserve. But that was not her attitude. Joe?
The flip side of that is they're listening to this servant girl who they brought into their home. So I'm with Jeff. I think there was a much stronger relationship or familiar relationship.
Well, they must have had some confidence in her, because he could have easily said, who are you to tell me this? How do I know this is not a trick and you're trying to cause harm? So there was some kind of a relationship there. I just think what stands out to me with this is just how different that could be. Is that if the servant girl's attitude had been different, the story would be a lot different. And so, as Ronnie said, she had not left her faith at home. And I think that's one of the standout points. I'm hoping that's kind of rising to the top. Let's talk for a moment then about the king. The king wants the best for Naaman. And Naaman says, okay, my servant girl has said there's this prophet in Samaria. He could do something, some help. And the king says, go, go. And gives a lot of riches. I forget, 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold. This is a lot. The king is willing to invest a lot in his commander if there is any hope or means that he might be made well through this, and says, I am sending my servant Naaman to you. This is a letter that he wrote to the king of Israel. With this letter, I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. To the king, that you may cure him of his leprosy. There's a little misunderstanding here. See, actually, it's not the king that has any hope of doing any healing. But the king of Syria doesn't quite understand. See, remember, it was the servant girl was talking about there's a prophet back in Samaria that can help with this. Okay? So there's a little disconnect that actually becomes, rather interesting right here. So, he travels to Israel. Verse 7. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. His concern? This is a trick. He expects me to do something that I can't do, and he knows that, but he's going to use that to start another war, another battle with me. And so, that's not working out well. Let's read just a little bit farther here, verse 9. Verse 8. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent a message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come see me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him to say, Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. All right, think about this for a moment. Is this what Naaman's expecting? No. Why? Why not? Why is it? What might he be expecting? What's that?
Because of his position, he was expecting big fanfare.
He thought, it's almost like, do you not know who I am? You want me to go dip 7 times? You must not be understanding who I am and who sent me here.
He also thought that the water is what was going to cleanse him.
Okay, so here's another thing, about this idea of going in and dipping in the Jordan 7 times, Let's see, verse 10, but Naaman went away angry. I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord and wave his hand over the spot and he'd cure me of my leprosy. You can almost picture what Naaman was expecting here. There's going to be some grand gesture. Are not the Abana, the Pharpar, and the rivers of Damascus better than any of waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? And so he turned and went off in a rage. All right, so we get a little bit of a picture of Naaman. I would say he thinks well of himself. And he was expecting a little more fanfare. He was expecting something spectacular to happen, from this man of God. And he's disappointed. And so he gets mad and he leaves. But the big point of this is that he leaves and he's still a leper. Nothing has happened. He wasn't cured. Why wasn't he cured? He lacked faith. Lack of action. He didn't do it. He didn't do what the man of God said to do. He's still a leper. He's not been cleansed of this disease because he didn't do what he was told to do. Joe?
Well, he was told to do by a messenger.
Oh, yeah.
More than he-
Yeah, well, it wasn't even Elijah. So that's kind of another dig almost. It's like, the prophet didn't even come and see me. Okay, so I'm hoping that there's some connections we're making on some of these points.
I think the whole story speaks to the dynamic of the way we as mankind think that things work, as far as like, oh, I can take this gold and I can buy healing, or I'm a man of renown, I should be talked to by the Lord. But the whole dynamic shifts that and shows that God is the one who's in control, and by him sending this messenger out, not even coming out, it shows Naaman that you're not as powerful.
The big picture here of who is in control. Think back to verse 1. Okay? What has Naaman accomplished? What's his reputation?
Great soldier.
He's a great soldier. He's a great commander. And that he has won battles. Right? The king recognizes Naaman as a great soldier. Where do those victories come from? From God. Who is in charge in this situation? God is in charge in this situation. Naaman thinks that he is. Naaman thinks that he is somebody. And so when the servant of the prophet comes out and says, go dip 7 times in the Jordan, are you kidding me? I've come all this way. And the prophet's not even going to come out. And you want me to dip in that dirty river over there? We see his mindset. We see where his head is at. Ronnie.
That's what I was thinking about. He already had his mind made up as to how he was supposed to be saved. And when the message did not fit his ideas, he rejected it. And that is kind of a really very foolish thing to do.
Are we making any connections with anything yet?
Well, he's literally been told to go jump in the lake, which is usually not a
Yeah. At least, that's not what the servant said, but that's what his ears heard. And it's like he's not taking this in a serious way at all, for many reasons. I saw him here, then over here.
I think it's also interesting to consider those, although everything we said is true about his attitude there, had to be a pretty special kind of leader for both his Israeli servants and his other trusted servants weren't afraid to come to him.
Interesting point.
Give him that advice.
Yeah.
I just think it's the other side of his nature that, in this case, was to his favor and to his benefit.
I don't want us to lose sight of the servant girl. And while we've talked about and said, okay, man, she wasn't in like really bad service. She was serving the commander of the army's wife, It's like she must have had a pretty good gig. Well, okay, so maybe that's better than some servants had it. She's not at home. She's been taken away from her family. She's not among her people. She is a servant. Okay, so look, these are all reasons that she could just have an attitude. And she would not serve in the way that she should. Naaman seemingly has possession of some good traits as well. His servant girl is not afraid to say something to him or to his wife, which says a little bit of something about him. And yet, on the other hand, we see this attitude from Naaman that it's like, do you not know who I am? The prophet sends out a servant to go tell me to wash in this dirty river over here. So, I kind of see both sides of Naaman. Now, I'll tell you, the side that kind of stands out to me more is this arrogant side. See, ultimately, he is receiving instructions from God. We think about that for a moment. He's receiving instructions from God. It's coming through God's prophet. And it's being delegated through the prophet's servant. And there is another faithful servant of God, the servant girl, who has influence here too to say, you should go see the prophet of God. So we see these good influences that are around him. But you have to kind of see that arrogance on the side of Naaman as well. We can say salvation is being offered to him because if he's not healed of leprosy, he is going to die. Salvation is being offered. But he has to hear the offer and he has to respond to that. It's a powerful story stacking up here.
I think another lesson to take from this is, even though he has that response, he does humble himself.
Oh, you get ahead of me, Joe. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. Kyle.
I think it's interesting to see, so he's expecting some big grand thing, right? And he's like, told me to go dip in this river. Why didn't you just call on the name of your Lord and all of these things? And I think it's a good lesson for us because God's plans aren't always what we think they should be. Oftentimes they're more simple. You know, for us as Christians, he tells us to be baptized, to wash away our sins. How does that make sense really for us to just go under the water and then our sins are no more? That's God's. And so ultimately, his servant comes to him and says, he told you to do some great thing, you would have done it. Why don't you just go do what he says?
It is. Let's read a little bit farther in the story here, and I think all the pieces start kind of coming together. And I love this idea, is that, Naaman is this really so hard? And even when we kind of correlate that to our lives now in service to God, and we look at how God views salvation, what we must do, is it really so hard? I mean, there's not a lot of pomp and circumstance around obeying the gospel, baptism into Jesus Christ. But it's not about pomp and circumstance. Just like with Naaman. It's about hearing the will of God and being moved by that. You see, that part's pretty simple. See, if we can get out of the headspace of Naaman, what he thought should happen and what he was expecting to happen, and we just go back listening to the simple instructions given by God. It's amazingly simple. Let's read a little more. Let's see. Where did we get to? Yes.
I'm wondering though, am I reading this wrong? Because I think he was frustrated to have to get in that dirty river. Because he's saying right here, aren't all those other waters better to wash in? Because they were clear mountain water. He was frustrated to have to get in there. Just like the time Jesus healed that blind man. He spilled the mud and put the mud on his eyes. I mean, he could have probably just healed him without doing all that. And sometimes we have to obey.
Sometimes we don't understand God's purpose. To your point, sometimes we just have to obey and just do what he says. And I think that's part of the point. Were those other rivers more desirable? Yes. Yeah, yes, they were. In so many places. Actually, the Jordan River is not all that glorious. And these other rivers were much nicer. But of course, that wasn't the point. Here's what God was saying about that. Okay, so we need to read just a little bit farther here. Let's see, where did we get to? Around verse 13. Naaman's servant went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all of his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Please accept now the gift from your servant." And the prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple in Rimmon to bow down, he is leaning on my arm, and I bow there also. When I bow down the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace," Elijah said. Naaman's kind of referring to, here's what my people do. Here is my past. Can you understand and forgive me? Backing up to the points made a moment ago about Naaman. Humility. There is this change of attitude in him. Now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel. That goes on to the next statement. The God that he had served, is not like the God of Israel. And so we start thinking again, still about these lessons learned. And I'm hoping that, Chris, we're not moving here. I'm hoping that we are understanding the quantum leap, the attitude here of Naaman. And what I keep saying, I hope we're making some connections of some things here. Can you work with me on that for a moment? Connections like what? When we look at the life here of Naaman, these events, what does any of that mean to us?
Might be important to think about faith in this case. It's faith that heals us. If you, in the case of Naaman, he thought it was something physical in terms of the water that might heal him, but when he got faith, he was healed. Okay,
but is it just faith? Because he had to do something. At first he didn't have faith, he did nothing. Okay? And so there was this idea here of something changed in his mind, and he realized, I have to listen to what Jehovah God is saying. Well, if he hadn't gone to the Jordan, would he have been cleansed? No. He had to follow through with what he was told to do. So it was an act of faith that did something there, right?
There's no external change without first internal.
Okay, good point. No external change until there was internal change. Okay, good point. I think that's right. Brian?
I think it's interesting that outside of the servants, enticing him to go do that, he's not thinking about doing it, but he trusted what they told him and he did it. If they hadn't offered that to him, so I guess the lesson for us is that sometimes fellow Christians that we talk to about different things, we should put a lot of stock in what they tell us.
Isn't it interesting, the influence of the young servant girl? You have to think about that for a moment. It was by her initial influence that this whole episode started. I mean, I'm thinking there's some very important things about this servant girl. We've said already. I mean, look, she is a servant girl. She has been captured and taken from her country. She's not at home. She's not with her family. She's not in a place where she can even serve her God in the way he should be served. All right, there's a whole lot of reasons why she could be upset and very negative and ugly about this whole thing, but she's not. I think we can learn some things from the servant girl about that, right?
I think one of the great lessons in this whole story for me is for us personally to ask ourselves, are we teachable?
Mm-hmm.
he was a man that had his mind made up as to how but he was teachable. When somebody pointed out his mistakes, he listened.
That's right.
So the question is for me to ask, am I teachable?
Teachable.
Can people really teach me and I learn from them? Or am I fixed in my ways and I'm not going to change my mind?
So the servant could have said the same thing to Naaman. You know, if the prophet had said, go do some great grand thing, you would have done that. But he just says, go dip into Jordan. You know, there was some reasoning that was given to Naaman. And he was willing to accept and respond to that. He was teachable that way. It's on our hand over here somewhere. Susan. Compassion. Okay. The servant girl showed compassion. She was willing to say, to teach someone who might not have responded. I mean, what's to say Naaman wouldn't have said, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? You are a foreigner in our country, you know, and you're trying to tell me about your God? He could have responded that way. I think we've seen others that have responded that way. I think we know people that respond that way. And so, yeah, okay, great. What other connections might we make, Donna?
When she said it, she said he would be healed if he thought. She didn't say he might be able to help you.
Confidence. That is interesting. That's right. That is interesting. You know, if you go there, he can heal you. It was an absolute. She recognized the prophet of God. And as we've seen, as we've talked about so much, you know, talking about Elisha, you know, was it about Elijah? No, it's not about Elijah. All these miracles that's done. You know, we started there this morning. It was all about the power of God that was demonstrated through Elisha. But it's about the power of God. Sam.
I think one teachers could bring out of this is that Naaman also was looking for instant gratification. We talk about that a lot.
Okay. Yeah. Like in the youth classes, you know, instant gratification. It's what Naaman wanted. And he was expecting that gratification to come in the way that he wanted it to come, in the way that he thought it should come. And again, it's a matter of stepping back and seeing and understanding that salvation comes by the way God dictates it must come. So I think that's for teachers next door. I think that's a good point too to be made. Jake?
I just obviously can't help but think of Jesus in the garden, letting go of every shred of his will, putting it all in God's will. And it's the same pattern. We see that pattern. And this is a perfect early example of that pattern that God has.
The point about humility here is one that I really hope stands out. You know, and we've seen different instances of that as we've been studying through the Bible story. Jake takes us all the way to Jesus, you know, in the garden. Let this cup pass from me, he prayed. But let your will be done. Willing to be submissive to the will of the Father. We've seen that with the faithful prophets and the things that they were able to do, not by their power or ability, but by their faithful service to God. And then those who benefited from what the prophets did. Time and time again, it was because of their willingness to hear what the prophets said and obey God. We see that pattern. John.
Yeah, I think another lesson to learn, you know, God worked through him in the beginning, but that doesn't mean Naaman knew that.
Right.
And
yeah, I think he didn't.
Relationship with everybody, regardless if they're from Syria or wherever. And that servant girl understood that as well, that no one's been saved that ain't been told.
Yeah.
So regardless of the confidence, but it's more confidence.
So God was working through Naaman. We saw back in chapter or in verse 1. You know, how much of that did Naaman really understand? I don't know. I mean, I think Naaman probably thought, I sure am a good commander.
Right.
But God has a purpose. God has a direction of where some things are going, you know, and as we've seen in some other times, and we're going to see more so going forward, there are times that God uses some unlikely people in our view to do and accomplish his will. Now, it's always for the benefit of his people in the end, But sometimes there are circumstances that take place and we go like, I don't understand this. Maybe we're not supposed to understand it. But we're to understand that God sometimes does some things that we don't understand. I think it was that way with Naaman. I don't have the impression that he knew at that point that God was working with him. I wonder if he wonders about it now, after this healing. So, anyway, good discussion today. I hope that's helpful. I thought we'd get through chapter 5. I didn't do too good with that part. So, a quick review of the latter part of chapter 5, chapter 6 on Wednesday night. Thank you for being here.